Sith we know today came from a species with the same name. Long before Sith Lords rose to power, this red-skinned species lived on the desert world of Korriban. They were naturally strong in the dark side of the Force, and survived by turning their harsh world into a place of power. These original Sith built a civilization that would leave a mark on the galaxy for thousands of years. This is the story of the Sith species, their rise, their culture, and the legacy they left behind. I've gone through all the legend sources to tell their full story, so enjoy. The Savage Homeworld. The Sith species evolved on Coraban around 100,000 BBY, and their tough environment shaped them over countless generations. This planet circled the red star Horaset in the far-off Outer Rim, far from most other civilizations. Being so isolated meant the Sith had to develop completely on their own, without any outside help or influence. The planet's climate was brutal. Korriban's air was breathable for most species, but the world itself was dry, dusty, and cold. Water was hard to find, and people had to come up with clever ways to save it and find the new reliable water sources scattered across the rocky landscape. Valuable minerals were buried deep in Korriban's mountains and canyon systems. These resources gave them the materials they needed for tools, weapons, and buildings, but digging them out required both skill and courage. The dangerous terrain made movement risky, and mining operations often dealt with cave-ins, shaky ground, and other dangers that killed people regularly. The secrets they found beneath the surface would change everything. At the heart of Sith civilization stood the Valley of the Dark Lords, a place filled with powerful dark side energy. The Sith evolved under the influence of this energy, developing a deep connection with the dark side itself. What made the Sith truly special was that almost every single member of their species could use the Force. Not just a few individuals, but basically everyone. Some legends even claim that the Sith got their food and energy directly from the dark side Force on Coraban, though people still argue about whether this was completely true. Early Sith society was split into many tribes and clans that constantly fought each other for power and land. Fighting wasn't something unusual for them, it was just how they lived. Each clan was led by powerful sorcerer chiefs who used dark side magic to control their people. Even though they were divided, the Sith species proved how strong they were early on. Around 30,000 BBY, they successfully fought off an invasion by the Killiks, bug-like creatures trying to take over Korriban. This victory showed that even when fighting amongst themselves, the Sith were incredibly dangerous when facing outside enemies. Even earlier, around 36,000 BBY, some Sith people were taken from Korriban to the planet Tython, where they joined the ancient Jedi Order. This was the group that would eventually split into the Jedi and their dark side enemies. This shows just how far back Sith influence goes in galactic history. Beyond its ancient history, Korriban's physical landscape played a crucial role in Sith society. The deep canyons and huge cave systems scattered across the planet offered natural shelter from the harsh surface conditions. However, these places weren't just refuges from the elements. They also held deep spiritual importance for the Sith, who believed certain spots contained stronger concentrations of dark side power than others. These sacred locations would eventually become sites for tombs, temples, and rituals that defined their culture. The planet's dangers didn't end with the terrain. Korriban's wildlife made daily life even more dangerous. The most well-known creatures were the Tukata, massive dog-like predators changed through alchemy to guard Sith tombs. Since they were naturally Force-sensitive, they became perfect protectors of sacred places and hidden knowledge. Even more dangerous were the Terentatic. These creatures were created through Sith alchemy and designed to hunt Force users. The Terentatics fed on Force-rich blood, which meant they hunted Sith purebloods exclusively. The Sith would use these beasts as weapons against their enemies, but they always feared the inevitable payback. By creating such dangerous creatures, the Sith had to constantly watch their backs, even from their own creations. The constant danger from these beasts meant everyone had to stay alert and be good at fighting. Survival required more than just Force powers. It needed real combat training, awareness of your surroundings, and the willingness to fight when necessary. These pressures created the aggressive, strength-focused culture that would define the Sith for thousands of years. Korriban's conditions forced each generation to prove they were strong enough to survive. This brutal cycle favored those with the strongest connection to the Force and the most determination to push through. What they learned here would be written into their very genes, shaping generations to come. The genetics of the Sith. The Sith species developed features that made them distinct from other humanoids across the galaxy. It's important to understand that Sith purebloods were not simply red humans. They were an entirely separate humanoid species with their own unique biology. Legend sources describe Sith purebloods with skin tones ranging from deep crimson to obsidian, with some individuals showing lighter red or pink hues. Their tough hides gave them an instantly recognizable appearance. Their hands and feet typically had 3 clawed digits, with 2 pointing forward and 1 back, though individual Sith showed considerable variation, with some having 4 or 5 digits instead. These digits ended in sharp claws that added to their fearsome reputation. They also had unique facial traits that set them apart. 2 thick, fleshy tendrils hung from their cheeks or jaws, while additional tendrils called cartilaginous eyebrow stalks protruded from their temples. They had small noses with broad nostrils, sharp teeth, and sometimes cranial horn-like bumps. Along with prominent bone ridges, these details gave Sith purebloods a striking and intimidating look. Many also displayed glowing yellow eyes, a natural characteristic of their species. Physical size and abilities varied by caste. The Massassi warriors were generally taller and stronger than others, fitting their role as shock troops. Despite having small ears, they possessed incredibly keen hearing and sharp senses that made them excellent hunters and fighters. The Kisai priest caste, meanwhile, often resembled typical humanoids in build, though their strength lay in their mastery of the Force rather than raw muscle. One lesser-known trait noted in legends is that the Sith often showed a tendency toward left-handedness. This was reflected in their signature weapon, the Lanvarok, a disc thrower designed specifically for left-handed use. Most importantly, the Sith were deeply connected to the Force. The entire species was strongly Force-sensitive, with a genetic predisposition far higher than baseline humans or most other species. According to the Book of Sith, the Sith species was driven by hunger, rage, and the dark side itself. Their connection to the Force went beyond what other species experienced. Some sources suggest they could even draw sustenance directly from dark side energy. Whether literal or symbolic, this deep bond gave them advantages in survival, combat, and dark side techniques that other beings needed years of training to achieve. This biological connection shaped every part of their lives. Sith children often developed Force awareness before they could walk or speak, weaving the Force into the very fabric of their daily existence. The dark side wasn't just something they learned, it was part of their biology, passed down through their bloodlines from one generation to the next. Yet this gift also created weakness. Their reliance on passion could lead to rash choices and internal conflict. The same hunger that made them powerful also made them vulnerable to their own emotions. These traits shaped everything. They determined who survived Korriban's harsh world and built the caste system that would define Sith society for millennia. Society and the caste system. Sith society was highly organized by rank. Roles and responsibilities were assigned by birth under a rigid caste system confirmed by the legend sources. These castes were sometimes called subspecies, though members of different castes could still interbreed and produce healthy offspring. This structure gave Sith civilization stability and order that lasted for generations. Unlike later Sith orders that emphasized personal advancement through conflict, the original system relied on inherited specialization. Each caste developed skills that supported the larger whole. At the top stood the Kisai, the priest caste who served as both spiritual and government leaders. Legend sources describe them as scholars of Sith magic and alchemy, just as ruthless as the Massassi, but more intelligent and watchful. They relied on cunning and knowledge rather than brute force. The Kisai guided society through sorcery and tradition. preserving knowledge through oral teaching, texts, and later holocrons, devices adapted from Rakatan technology and refined into advanced repositories of Sith lore. As bridges between the living and the dark side, they tended the tombs of fallen Dark Lords and performed ancestor rituals. These rites were believed to draw wisdom from the dead, especially in the Valley of the Dark Lords, where tomb complexes housed kings and warriors. Through offerings and ceremonies, they bound the living Sith to their ancestors, preserving not only faith but also access to hidden knowledge. Beyond preserving the past, the Kisai also performed darker rituals that defined Sith culture. They conducted blood sacrifices to their gods and prepared blood soup, a ritual drink made from the blood of sacrificed beings. These practices were not seen as evil or wrong. To the Sith, violence and war were as natural as peace, simply different parts of life. This philosophy extended even to death itself. When a Sith Lord died, the Kisai oversaw burial customs that reflected the brutal nature of their society. Slaves, including lower caste Sith, were sealed alive inside the tombs alongside their dead masters, serving them even in death. This practice was not questioned. It was simply how things were done. The Kisai also served as keepers of the Sith language. The species developed its own script, angular runes known as Kitat or High Sith. Preserved samples in works like the Book of Sith show incantations, alchemical formulas, and historical records written in this form. By controlling literacy and restricting access to the script, the Kisai strengthened their authority as cultural gatekeepers. Below the Kisai ranked the Massassi, the warrior caste who specialized in combat and defense. Where the Kisai ruled through knowledge, the Massassi enforced that rule through strength. They were the largest and strongest of the Sith, feared as brutal warriors who formed the backbone of Sith armies. Under the Dark Jedi Exiles, they were further reshaped through alchemy into monstrous, fanatically loyal enforcers. Massassi training began in childhood, ensuring martial traditions endured across generations. Their culture prized strength, courage, and loyalty above all else. Supporting both the priestly Kisai and the warrior Massassi were the Zuguruk, the builders and engineers of Sith civilization. Legend sources identify them as loyal workers responsible for architecture and technology, from the massive tombs of the valley to the starships that carried Sith beyond Korriban. Their engineering used careful load distribution, structural reinforcement, and environmental adaptation, allowing buildings to survive Korriban's brutal conditions. Some tombs included defensive features, hidden chambers, and traps to protect treasures from thieves and rivals. Despite centuries of storms, war, and deliberate destruction, many Zuguruk structures remain standing today. At the bottom of Sith society were the Grothu, the slave caste. According to the Book of Sith, the Grothu were a mixed group of species, slaves from different backgrounds forced into menial labor, mining, construction, farming, and household service. Treatment varied by task. Mining was especially lethal, with cave-ins and toxic conditions claiming lives regularly. Construction offered slightly better conditions, though the work remained dangerous. Domestic service was the safest, though it meant constant proximity to masters who could punish or kill at will. Yet across all roles, freedom and advancement were nearly impossible. The caste system created clear expectations and maintained order. Children inherited their parents' positions and began training early, ensuring each generation knew its place and purpose. However, the system's rigidity also created weaknesses. Talent in lower castes often went wasted, while incompetence in higher castes went unchecked. Still, even this sophisticated order would pale compared to what they achieved once they mastered the Force itself. Force mastery and philosophy. The Sith species were natural users of the dark side. They developed Force techniques and philosophical approaches that influenced all future dark side traditions. Their especially strong connection to the Force, combined with Korriban's dark side nexus, gave them unique advantages in exploring dark side abilities. Sith philosophy emphasized that emotions were the primary source of Force power. Anger boosted strength, fear sharpened awareness, ambition enabled seemingly impossible achievements. Unlike Force traditions that valued detachment and calm, The Sith channeled feelings directly into their abilities. They treated passion as sacred fuel. Warriors channeled rage for combat effectiveness. Scholars used intense focus to unlock ancient secrets. Leaders employed calculated fury to inspire followers and intimidate rivals. The philosophical ideas that lived in Sith culture reflected their harsh reality on Korriban. Peace was weakness, passion led to strength, conflict drove progress. These were not written codes or formal doctrine. They were simply how the Sith understood the world, passed down through spoken traditions and ritual teachings. The famous Sith Code would come much later, written by others who adopted Sith ways. The Sith maintained rich ritual traditions overseen by the Kisai. These were often tied to ancestor worship and dark side ceremonies. Group rituals sometimes involved combining multiple participants' force abilities to achieve effects impossible for individuals alone. Over centuries, the Sith developed alchemical techniques that could transform living beings and enhance materials. This practice demanded rare skill, extensive resources, and dangerous experimentation. The Kisai spent years mastering these techniques, creating creatures like the Tukata and the Tarantatic that served as guardians and weapons, though not without risk to their creators. Sith alchemy also produced enhanced weapons, armor, and tools. Alchemically reinforced Sith swords could withstand any blow, even parrying lightsabers. These weapons survived through thousands of generations in perfect condition, their edges remaining sharp and their blades straight. The Sith also created talismans, objects that help focus and amplify dark side power during rituals and combat. Techniques for creating these items were closely guarded secrets, passed down within the Kisai caste. The Sith established grand library temples where scholars gathered to meditate and record knowledge from their experiments. The most famous was on Creuss II, a massive repository that housed the accumulated wisdom of generations of Sith magicians. These libraries preserved scrolls, artifacts, and teachings that might otherwise have been lost to war and death. The Sith also preserved their teachings in repositories containing Force-imbued knowledge. While the specifics of how these devices were created would become clearer in later years, they represented the Sith's commitment to ensuring critical knowledge survived individual deaths, political upheavals, and civilizational collapse. The Sith developed their own language to preserve their teachings. They wrote in angular runes known as Kitat, or High Sith. These tomes contain Sith teachings, lore, and force techniques in the species' ancient tongue. However, the language was incredibly complex, with strange word structures that few scholars could decipher and even fewer could pronounce. The Kisai controlled literacy, restricting access to the script and maintaining their position as keepers of knowledge. But all their power would soon face an unprecedented challenge when explorers arrived from beyond the stars. The Rakatan invasion. Around 28,000 BBY, a massive Sith warrior with charcoal-black skin rose to power on Korriban. His name was Adas. From youth, his unusual dark coloring was seen as an omen of greatness. He proved this prophecy true through superior force abilities, strategic brilliance, and ruthless determination. Adas systematically defeated rival warlords and clan leaders, uniting the constantly warring Sith tribes under a single rule for the first time in their history. Wielding alchemically forged battle axes, he carved a path to absolute power. The Sith people, long divided by tribal conflicts, finally had one disputed ruler. He earned the title Sithari, meaning the Lord or Overlord. This title carried spiritual meaning beyond political authority. The Sith came to believe Adas was not just their king, but their god, immortal and destined to rule forever. No Sith before him had commanded such respect or achieved such unity. Adas ruled for approximately 300 years, sustained by the dark side of the Force. This unprecedented stability allowed Sith civilization to flourish in ways never before possible. Internal conflicts decreased dramatically. Coordination between castes improved. Infrastructure projects connected isolated communities across Korriban. Knowledge could be systematized and preserved rather than lost to endless warfare. Under Adas's leadership, the Sith began recording their spoken traditions, compiling ritual techniques and creating repositories that could survive individual deaths. This lay the groundwork for more sophisticated methods of knowledge preservation that would soon arrive from an unexpected source. Within centuries of Adas's rise, around 27,700 BBY, visitors arrived from beyond the stars. The Rakatan Infinite Empire controlled vast galactic territories through advanced technology and force-based domination. They had conquered countless worlds and enslaved numerous species. Now they turned their attention to Korriban. Initial contacts seemed promising. The Rakata presented themselves as teachers and allies. They offered to share advanced knowledge with the Sith, including the secret of creating holocrons, sophisticated pyramidal devices that could store a person's force essence and teachings. King Adas, intrigued by this technology, learned to record his own knowledge into a holocron, creating an artifact that would survive for millennia. However, Rakatan society was built on domination and exploitation. They viewed other species as naturally inferior, existing only to serve Rakatan interests. The Sith, despite their own rigid hierarchy, prized independence and strength. When the Rakata revealed their true intention to conquer and enslave the Sith people, war became inevitable. The conflict tested everything the Sith had built under Adas's rule. The Rakata possessed superior technology, advanced weapons, and resources drawn from across the galaxy. The Sith faced technological and resource disadvantages that would have crushed a lesser civilization. But the Sith had advantages of their own. They fought on their homeworld, surrounded by Korriban's dark side nexus, operating at peak force effectiveness. Their intimate knowledge of the planet's terrain provided tactical benefits that offset technological inferiority. Under Adas's leadership, the caste system functioned as a coordinated military force. Massassi warriors provided frontline combat power. Kisai priests used force abilities to counter Rakatan technologies. Zaguric engineers worked to understand and adapt captured equipment. The entire population contributed to the war effort within their caste capacities. King Adas, nearly 3 centuries old but still powerful, led his people in battle. In the final, decisive confrontation, he personally killed the Rakatan commander. This dealt a devastating morale blow that broke the Rakatan assault. The Sith were victorious, but victory came at a terrible cost. Adas fell in that final battle, giving his life to secure his people's freedom. The Rakatan forces, leaderless and demoralized, retreated from Korriban. They left behind a devastated world. The long war had turned much of Korriban into a wasteland, its cities ruined and its resources depleted. Through this victory, Adas acquired Rakatan technology that would prove transformative for Sith civilization. This advanced technology gave the Sith the means to travel beyond Korriban and establish a presence on other worlds. In the aftermath of the war, many Sith relocated to the nearby forest world of Ziost, which offered more fertile land and stability for rebuilding. Korriban, once the thriving center of Sith civilization, was designated as their tomb world, a sacred burial ground where the great would be laid to rest. Adas's victory became a defining cultural memory. It proved that unity and determination could overcome technologically superior foes. His sacrifice added tragic nobility to his legend. His holocron, passed to his trusted advisor known as the Shadow Hand, ensured his teachings would survive. The Sith honored Adas as the Sithari, the perfect embodiment of their ideals. Adas's death created an immediate leadership crisis. No successor commanded the same respect or possessed his exceptional abilities. He had been worshipped as a god for 3 centuries. His death shattered the belief in his immortality and left a void that could not be filled. According to Tales of the Jedi, the Sith Empire once again plunged into civil war, as various warlords proclaimed themselves the new Sithari. Different factions backed different claimants. Each argued their candidate possessed the necessary leadership qualities to unite the Sith once more. But none could hold power. None could match Adas's strength or charisma. Adas would be remembered as the first and last king to truly unite all Sith under one rule. For nearly 24 millennia after his death, no single ruler would successfully bring the Sith species together again. This succession crisis would transform Sith civilization in ways no external threat could achieve. The fall of the Sith. The collapse of Sith unity following Adas's death was swift and devastating. With no established succession laws or universally accepted heirs, warlords across Korriban claimed the title of Sithari. The warrior culture that had defended against external enemies now turned inward. The unity that had saved them would now be their downfall. Regional power bases that Adas had united through conquest reasserted themselves. Different Sith lords controlled separate territories, each commanding their own Massassi warriors and Kisai priests. What had been a single kingdom broke into rival territories, each seeking to recreate Adas's empire under their own rule. Yet despite this political chaos, Sith civilization did not collapse entirely. Over the next 20,000 years, successive Sith lords used the Rakatan technology Adas had acquired to expand beyond their homeworld. They conquered worlds throughout what would become known as Sith space, establishing strongholds on planets both within and outside the Stygian caldera. The Sith species, once confined to Korriban, now controlled multiple star systems. This expansion, however, brought new divisions. Not all Sith accepted the direction their civilization was taking. Some Kisai priests could not reconcile Adas's death with their belief in his divine power. Unable to accept that their god king had fallen, these heretics were cast out. They settled on the distant world of Tund, where they practiced their own isolated form of Sith sorcery, becoming known as the Sorcerers of Tund. Other conquered worlds became centers of Sith power in their own right. The temples of Malsahor and Thule were fortified against any counterattack. Ziost, which had been important even during Adas's reign, became a major Sith stronghold. Yet no single ruler managed to unite all these territories as Adas had done. The Sith remained powerful but divided, their empire more a collection of rival domains than a unified civilization. Prolonged warfare across multiple worlds wore down Sith capabilities over the millennia. Skilled practitioners died before fully training successors. Rival domains refused to share innovations with their enemies. Knowledge that might have advanced their civilization was instead hoarded or lost in the endless conflicts. Some traditions proved resilient despite the chaos. Martial training remained essential as ongoing conflicts made combat skills necessary for survival. Religious practices and Force traditions continued because they provided both practical advantages and cultural identity. The caste system persisted in providing local organizational structure, even when larger political institutions collapsed. Tomb construction continued in the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban, indicating that some communities retained sufficient resources and organization for monumental projects. Holocron creation persisted as well, allowing knowledge preservation despite political instability. Yet the overall trend was a decline. Each generation consumed resources and lives without rebuilding what was lost. Among all the warlords who rose during this dark age, none proved more destructive than Dathka Graush. Around 7000 BBY, Graush declared himself King of Korriban and unleashed some of the bloodiest civil wars in Sith history. His reign was marked by necromancy, sorcery that brought dead warriors back to life to serve again in battle. Facing their own dead raised against them broke the morale of Graush's enemies. His dominance came at a terrible cost. Cities and strongholds were ravaged, ancient tombs were defiled in his wars. Eventually, Graush was overthrown and entombed in the Valley of Golg, where his heart, an alchemically preserved crystal, remained a focus of dark power long after his death. The undead legions he raised collapsed with him, leaving Korriban scarred both physically and spiritually. The devastation he left behind weakened the Sith species beyond repair. Around 6900 BBY, when the Dark Jedi Exiles arrived from the Old Republic, they found a civilization divided among multiple worlds but united by neither politics nor purpose. The Sith retained their Force abilities, their combat skills, and their core cultural values. Individual communities still practiced the traditions of passion, strength, and power that had defined their species for millennia. But they had no Sithari, no unifying authority, no coordinated defense against external threats. The strangers who arrived would not come as conquerors, they would come as gods. The Dark Jedi Exiles. Around 6900 BBY, strangers arrived on Korriban who would forever change the Sith species and their place in the galaxy. These were the Dark Jedi Exiles, survivors of a war that had torn apart the Jedi Order itself. The conflict that led to their arrival began approximately a century earlier, around 7000 BBY. A group of Jedi discovered they could use the Force to transform living creatures into powerful servants and weapons. They believed the Force could be used to bend life itself to their will. This represented a major break from standard Jedi teachings, which did not allow such manipulation. When these Dark Jedi refused to stop their experiments, war broke out within the Jedi Order. The conflict lasted more than 100 years, destroying countless worlds. The Dark Jedi created monster beasts called Leviathans and other changed creatures to fight for them. But despite their power, they were eventually defeated. The final battle took place in the mining world of Korbos. There, the traditional Jedi crushed the Dark Jedi's remaining forces. Among the survivors was a former Jedi Master named Ajunta Pall, who had personally killed more than a dozen Jedi during the battle. But even his skills could not prevent their defeat. Rather than kill their defeated enemies, the winning Jedi chose exile. They took away all the Dark Jedi's weapons and loaded them onto a drone starship with no navigation equipment. The ship was programmed to carry them far beyond Republic space, to an unexplored region of the Outer Rim where they could never threaten the Jedi again. This act of mercy would have results no one could predict. The drone ship drifted through hyperspace, guided only by the dark side of the Force. The exiles had no way to control where they went. They had no weapons to defend themselves. Many believed they would not survive. But after coming out of hyperspace, their ship eventually arrived at a world strong in the dark side. They had found Coraban. The Sith species greeted these strangers with suspicion and fear. Sensing the Dark Jedi's power, the Sith tried to drive them away using illusions and sorcery. Some of these displays were impressive, showing the natural Force abilities the Sith had. The Sith were eager to protect their secrets and prove themselves against these intruders. But the Dark Jedi, though weaponless, were far more skilled in using the Force. Years of war had improved their abilities beyond what the Sith's tribal sorcerers could match. Even the most talented Sith could not stand against them. The Dark Jedi used the Force itself as their weapon, beating the Sith through better knowledge and training. Eventually, the Sith gave up. Recognizing the overwhelming power of these strangers, they accepted defeat. What followed was not partnership, but conquest. The Dark Jedi took control of Sith society step by step. Ajunta Pall, one of the most powerful exiles, challenged and killed Korriban's ruling king, Hakagrum Graush. By taking the throne through combat, Pall made himself the new ruler and claimed the title Janari, meaning Dark Lord of the Sith. Other Dark Jedi similarly made themselves rulers and teachers across Sith territories. The conquered Sith, especially the Massassi warriors, lived only to serve their new masters. The Dark Jedi adapted the existing caste system to their needs rather than destroying it. Warriors fit in with Massassi traditions. Those interested in alchemy found common ground with Kisai priests. The structures the Sith had built over thousands of years provided frameworks for bringing the newcomers into positions of power. Over time, what began as a conquest changed into something more complicated. The Dark Jedi recognized that the Sith had valuable knowledge of alchemy and darkside techniques unknown to the Jedi. The Sith, in turn, gained access to advanced Force training and a broader understanding of the galaxy. Marriage and children began between the Dark Jedi and native Sith. Over the following centuries, bloodlines mixed, creating hybrid descendants who combined human and Sith features. This biological fusion matched a cultural one. Sith traditions were organized and improved through contact with Dark Jedi knowledge. Spoken traditions were written down. Ritual practices were turned into teachable methods. The Dark Jedi brought structure and galactic knowledge. The Sith provided biological Force sensitivity and ancient wisdom built up over thousands of years. The Massassi went through especially dramatic changes. Through Sith alchemy, they were further transformed into even more powerful and monstrous warriors. These changed Massassi became extremely loyal enforcers who would serve Sith Lords for generations to come. As the hybrid civilization developed, Ziost became the new center of government. The planet's better environment allowed large-scale city building and industrial growth that devastated Korriban could not support. Korriban remained important as a sacred burial ground, but Ziost became the capital world where Sith Lords built their palaces and fortresses. The fusion of Dark Jedi and Sith created something new. Neither purely the species nor purely the exiled Jedi, this hybrid civilization combined the Force abilities of both groups. Over nearly 2,000 years, this hybridization continued. By the time of the Great Hyperspace War around 5000 BBY, almost all Sith had mixed heritage. Pure-blood Sith had become increasingly rare. This hybridization marked a transformation in what Sith meant. The term expanded from referring to a species to describing an order of dark side users. The philosophical ideas that would eventually be formalized into the Sith Code began taking shape during this period, blending the passionate, strength-focused worldview of the original Sith with the Dark Jedi's rejection of Jedi limitations. The strangers who arrived as gods had created an empire, and that empire would one day threaten the entire galaxy. The Great Hyperspace War. Around 5000 BBY, the Sith Empire met its end in a catastrophic war that scattered the species across the galaxy. What began as an accidental encounter between two civilizations exploded into the Great Hyperspace War, a conflict that would destroy the Sith Empire, drive the original species toward extinction, and plant seeds of darkness throughout the known galaxy. The war started with pure chance. Two Republic explorers, Gav and Jory Daragon, made a mistake with their hyperspace jump and accidentally arrived on Korriban. Their timing couldn't have been worse. They landed right in the middle of the funeral for Marka Ragnos, the half-blood Dark Lord who had ruled the Sith Empire for over a century. The gathered Sith Lords, already tense about who would rule next, were shocked to see strangers at their most sacred ceremony. For generations, the Sith had lived in isolation. They rarely had contact with anyone beyond their borders, first with the Rakatan Infinite Empire thousands of years ago, and later with the exiled Dark Jedi. Now, during a moment of weakness and change, strangers appeared carrying knowledge of a huge republic the Sith never knew existed. Many Sith Lords wanted to kill the explorers immediately. The intruders had seen their internal fights and represented an unknown threat. Ludo Kresh, leader of the traditional faction, argued that the explorers should die at once to keep their secrets safe. This hostile reaction showed how the Sith species viewed outsiders, not as potential partners, but as dangers that must be removed. Naga Sadao, however, saw an opportunity where others saw only risk. He orchestrated the explorers' escape and killed his rival Simus, staging the incidents to look like Republic attacks. This clever trick convinced most Sith that war was inevitable and that they needed strong leadership. The manipulation worked perfectly. Sadao gained enough support to become Dark Lord, while Kresh was forced to flee in anger. Once Sadao controlled the Sith Council, he prepared for war against the Republic. Despite Sadao's rise to power, the rivalry between him and Kresh didn't end. Kresh attacked Sadao's forces on Kar Delba, but Sadao had planned ahead. The fortress was just a decoy. Sadao ambushed and destroyed Kresh's forces from a secret base on Kar Shian, the moon of Kar Delba. Believing Kresh was dead after this battle, Sadao moved forward with his plan to invade the Republic. Sadao gathered the Empire's fleets and Massassi armies for a massive invasion. Using hyperspace coordinates that Gav Daragon had provided, called the Daragon Trail, Sadao launched attacks on multiple Republic systems at the same time. He used Sith magic to create huge illusions that made his forces look far more numerous than they really were. Sadao stayed in his meditation sphere at the Primus Golud star, controlling the war through mental projection and illusions, while his armies struck across Republic space. The Sith achieved shocking early victories. They surprised the Chorus system, ruled by Empress Teta. and even attacked Coruscant itself, nearly overrunning the Republic capital. The Republic defenders struggled against what seemed like endless Sith forces and their strange weapons. On Coruscant, Sith landing forces, led by Sith Lord Shar Dakan, pushed all the way to the steps of Senate Hall, where the last group of Jedi kept fighting against wave after wave of Sith attacks. However, the Sith faced serious problems that illusions couldn't hide. Their smaller population and limited industrial power meant they couldn't match the Republic's vast resources. While the Sith controlled dozens of worlds with millions or billions of people, the Republic had thousands of worlds with trillions. This huge difference in resources meant that even when the Sith won battles, the victories cost them more than they could afford to lose. The turning point came from an unexpected source: Gav Daragon's change of heart. Sadao had made Gav a commander of his forces, but Gav felt guilty after his friend Arba the Hutt died in the fighting. He flew back to Primus Golud and attacked Sadao's meditation sphere, hoping to break the Dark Lord's focus and stop the magic he was using to control his armies. Just as Coruscant was about to fall to the Sith forces, Sadao's concentration broke. The illusions disappeared, showing that the Sith armies were actually much smaller than they appeared. The Republic forces, who had been on the edge of defeat, suddenly rallied once they saw the truth. They launched a counterattack with what they had left of their military against the confused Sith, pushing them back into retreat. On the planet Kirek, the Massassi warriors kept fighting even after the illusions fell. Jedi Master Uru released poisonous cyanogen gas to kill the Sith in the area, sacrificing his own life, but the single-minded Massassi, in their rage, kept pushing forward anyway. Eventually, when reinforcements from Ronica arrived to help the Kirek defenders, the Sith had to retreat. The Republic and its allies had won. Following the collapse of Sadao's illusions, Republic forces and reinforcements gained confidence. They pushed back the retreating Sith fleet all the way to Chorus Major. Jori Daragon, who had been there when Arba died, followed Gav from Chorus Major and called on Empress Tata's fleet for help. The Tatan forces and other Republic ships came out of hyperspace at Primus Golud to face Sadao and what remained of his recalled forces. Sadao had tricked Gav Daragon and trapped him on his damaged meditation sphere, while Sadao himself escaped into his Sith battleship. The Republic and Sith forces fought in space before Sadao used his power to make the red supergiant star explode into a supernova. This killed Gav Daragon and many Republic ships, while Sadao and his surviving forces jumped back to Sith space. When Sadao returned to Sith space, he discovered that Ludo Kresh had survived his earlier defeat. Kresh had gathered his own forces, bringing together those Sith lords who chose to stay behind, and promising them wealth and power if they helped him fight Sadao. With their support, he took control and became the Dark Lord of the Sith Empire while Sadao was out trying to conquer the Republic. When Sadao came back to Korriban to gather more Sith forces, Kresh revealed himself. He told Sadao that the title of Dark Lord had been taken away, and expressed how he had used a decoy ship to fake his own death above Car Delba. Dark Lord Kresh then exiled Sadao from Sith space forever. The two Sith fleets fought in a battle driven by pride. Kresh's forces devastated Sadao's already damaged ships. However, the battle ended when Sadao ordered one of his doomed ships to crash into Kresh's flagship, killing the Dark Lord. The remains of Kresh's fleet held back, choosing not to keep fighting Sadao's forces. Immediately after, Republic forces who had followed the Daragon Trail to Sith space came out of hyperspace near Sadao's battered fleet. The Republic fleet crushed Sadao's remaining ships, winning a decisive victory. After Sadao refused Empress Tata's offer to surrender, he made a barrier with his remaining ships and headed for the Denari binary stars. He then used the Force and the remaining power on his ship to cause both stars to explode into supernovas, escaping while destroying his Republic pursuers in the process. With Sadao thought dead in the star explosions, Empress Tata recalled the Republic fleet and left the broken Empire. At this point, the Empire no longer threatened the Republic. However, Supreme Chancellor Poltimo wasn't satisfied with just winning. He ordered an invasion of Sith space to wipe out the Sith civilization completely and make sure the Sith never returned. The Republic's and Jedi's mission was to leave no remnants of the Sith Empire. Hundreds of Republic warships invaded the Stygian caldera to attack the confused Empire, which was still in chaos after the death of their leader, Ludo Kresh. The Jedi Order also invaded with their Jedi shadows, looking to destroy everything they found about Sith teachings and ways. Together, the Jedi and Republic destroyed Sith Lords, their artifacts, talismans, and strongholds, eventually forcing the Sith to the point of surrender. During this period, Jedi Master Odan-Ur used a unique way to fight the Sith. Instead of hurting them, he took away individual Sith's power, stripping them of their ability to use the dark side. He used this technique so often on the Sith that he became an expert at it. Shar Dakan, now the acting Dark Lord with both Kresh and Sadao gone, had his Massassi warriors crash into the invading fleets in death charges as a last desperate option. The heavy casualties these tactics caused forced the Republic into a temporary retreat. Eventually, though, the Sith were driven to defeat. Many lower-class Sith killed themselves in rituals rather than be captured. Within a few years, the Empire fell apart completely. The Sith worlds were absorbed into the Republic. At the end of the Great Hyperspace War, most people widely believed that the Sith were extinct as both a religion and a species. Despite the thorough destruction, scattered groups of Sith managed to survive in three major groups. The first and most important group fled deep into unknown space. At least a few hundred Sith, along with tens of thousands of prisoners from their early victories, used random hyperspace coordinates in desperation to escape the Jedi and Republic. For 20 years, this fleet drifted through deep space, making random jumps and sending out blind scouting missions. Their leader was a Sith named Tenebrae, later known as Vitiate. Born in 5113 BBY on the remote world of Medrias, he was the illegitimate son of Lord Dramath, a Sith ruler. He showed terrifying force abilities from early childhood. His black eyes showed no emotion, and even animals avoided him. By age 6, he had killed his own father and enslaved his village, bending thousands to his will. He soon declared himself ruler of Medrias, naming it Nathema. When the Great Hyperspace War ended in disaster around 5000 BBY, Tenebrae saw his opportunity. He called the remaining Sith Lords to Nathema, promising power beyond imagination. Over 10 days, he performed a ritual that consumed the life force of 8,000 Sith and every living thing on the planet. Nathema became a void in the Force itself, lifeless, silent, stripped of all connection to the galaxy's energy. The ritual transformed Tenebrae, giving him near immortality. Taking the name Vitiate, he declared himself Sith Emperor. During their 20-year journey, the fleet encountered the Chiss Ascendancy. Unlike other civilizations the Sith had conquered, the Chiss surprised them by looking for peaceful solutions. Chiss negotiators met with Imperial diplomats, and the Chiss became the first official allies of the exiled Empire. Eventually, the fleet found the long-forgotten Sith world of Dromund Kaas. There, under Vitiate's immortal rule, the purebloods preserved their traditions and authority, even as their numbers slowly declined through mixed marriages. For over 1,000 years, generations devoted their lives to building massive armies and fleets, all serving the Emperor's dreams of revenge. The second survivor was the most notorious, Naga Sadow himself. After causing the Denari Nova that made everyone think he died, and getting exiled from Sith space by Ludo Kresh, Sadow fled with his remaining followers aboard a single ship to the Yavin system. There, on the jungle moon called Yavin 4, he set up his final hideout. Sadow buried his Sith battleship deep underground and left his Massassi crew behind as guards. He ordered the Massassi to build a series of huge temples across the moon. These massive buildings were designed as dark side power sources. Using Sith technology as magic, Sadow sealed himself in a special chamber beneath the main temple's focusing room, putting himself in suspended animation. he promised to wait until someone came who could continue his dark teachings and bring about the new Sith Golden Age that Mark Aragnos had predicted. Planning to create guards to protect his legacy, Sadao used Sith alchemy to perform horrible experiments on the Masashi he had brought with him. Through his chemical knowledge, he transformed them into stronger and more violent creatures, but much less intelligent. Over the centuries after Sadao went into hibernation, these primitive Masashi savages got even worse, becoming powerful but simple-minded beings who worshipped one of Sadao's alchemical creations as a god. The third group of survivors was accidental. The crew of the Sith ship Omen, mostly human and part Sith under Sadao's command, got knocked off course during hyperspace travel. A Jedi starfighter had attacked them while they mined lignin ore before the Battle of Kirak, causing their ship to crash into its sister ship, Harbinger. These Sith found an unknown planet that the natives called Kesh. The survivors conquered the native Kashiri people, who started worshipping them as godlike beings called the Skyborn from their legends. 15 years after landing, the remaining Red Sith, those with more pure Sith blood, tried using a deadly chemical to convince the colony to focus on getting off the planet. However, one human Sith who hated all Red Sith framed them for the attack and convinced her husband, the Grand Lord, to launch a genocide that killed every Red Sith on the isolated world. The scattering after the Great Hyperspace War sped up the decline of the pure Sith genetic line. Intermarriage with human and near-human populations became increasingly common as survivors tried to blend into existing communities to avoid detection and persecution. The distinctive Sith pure blood physical features, red skin, facial tendrils, and bone spurs, became rarer with each generation. By the Old Republic era, several thousand years after the war, most people who identified as Sith were mainly human or near-human. They were descendants who kept cultural elements without keeping the original species' unique appearance. However, some pure-blood families survived. The reconstituted Sith Empire under Vitiate on Droman Kos featured Sith purebloods who maintained traditional appearances and customs. These survivors often held positions of cultural respect, even though they lacked their ancestors' political power. The genetic decline of the pure-blood Sith population meant a huge loss of unique biological ability. The natural force sensitivity and dark side connection that characterized the original species couldn't be fully replicated through training alone. The later Sith relied more heavily on discipline, philosophy, and ambition rather than the inborn abilities of their pure-blood ancestors. Nevertheless, the cultural and philosophical elements of Sith identity proved tougher than biological traits. Core beliefs about passion, strength, and power that defined the original species kept influencing practitioners regardless of genetic heritage. By the time of Darth Bane around 1000 BBY, after the Battle of Ruusan destroyed the Brotherhood of Darkness, the Sith species were considered long extinct. The original race of beings known as the Sith disappeared into history. Over time, the word Sith changed to mean a cult dedicated to the dark side of the Force rather than the species itself. The Great Hyperspace War marked the end of the Sith Empire as a major power, but it proved impossible to completely wipe out the Sith or their teachings. The survivors who scattered across known space and beyond carried with them the knowledge, artifacts, and ideas that would keep threatening the Republic for thousands of years to come. The Sith species genetically disappeared, but their culture and teachings lived on through later Sith Lords who inherited their philosophy of power, passion, and strength. Among those who sought this ancient knowledge, one figure stands above all others. A fallen Jedi who walked the tombs of Korriban, studied the holocrons of the original Sith Lords, and nearly conquered the galaxy using their teachings. That figure was Darth Revan. To discover how one man resurrected the power of the ancient Sith and nearly brought the Republic to its knees, watch his story next.